Okay, we're in Ephesians chapter 4 and going to begin in verse 17. If you would, let's read together. This I say, therefore, and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. But you did not learn Christ in this way, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former manner of life you lay aside the old self, which being corrupted in accordance with the lust of deceit, and that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. Marilyn and I on the way up, or way down, I guess, this afternoon. I said to her, my mind's been on this now for about 3 months, and reading and rereading and thinking about this topic. And I said, I can't figure out why in the world the day that I'm supposed to deliver this lesson is that I had one of the more trying days of my life. And I found myself having to try to put into practice what I've been studying for months, and I don't like doing that. I'd rather just talk about it and let you wrestle with it, and then I'll go on and live my life. Application is very, very difficult. One of the things that we have done at Griffithville that makes it even more aggravating is that our Sunday morning lesson, if Dale Huff presents the lesson, then I'll do the application. If I present the lesson, well, Dale will do the application. So we have our sermon, and then we take a little break for coffee and that sort of thing. We come back then, and the next person has to do the application. As Alan Pogue would ask the question, when you hear something, you say, so what? So what? And then you ask the second question, now what? So that's what we are doing at Griffithville, is taking the lesson, and then we're coming back with an application and saying, okay, here's what we do with this lesson. And we try to make the application. And I'm finding it more and more difficult. I'd rather present the lesson and let Dale do the application of the lesson, and then pretend I'm not hearing what he has to say. Applications are always difficult, but without the application, then really we're like the individual who looks into the perfect law of liberty and then immediately and sees what manner of man he ought to be, and then he turns away and forgets immediately how he should be. It's easy to do that. I'm not castigating anybody. I'm not saying if you don't do that. You probably do a much better job at that than I do. But I find the application so much of the time very difficult to do. Listen to the things that is said in this chapter. I've kind of outlined it just for myself. It says, first of all, that these individuals, my topic is being transformed from the inside out. And Paul begins by saying, talking about the futility of their mind. Futility of their mind. I thought, what in the world is futility? And the first definition that you'll find of futility is that it's easily poured out. I thought, that's a strange definition. What is easily poured out? Well, that's futility. So, in other words, it's really not of any value at all, and it's easily poured out. Just cast it aside. And so, but we see, he says they're captivated in the futility of their mind, and also the word is a word for useless also. So you can see, okay, it's easily poured out because it's useless. It's no longer of any value, so you can just pour it out. And so then a lot of things in life that we sometimes spend some time on, after it's all said and done, we thought, that was useless. Marilyn and I will try to watch a TV program every now and then if we can find one that we can watch. And more often than not, one of us will turn to the other and say, well, that was sure a waste of an hour and a half. It was really basically useless, so we just poured it out and forgot about it. And every now and then you'll find a jewel and you stay with it, like Andy and Barney and some of the great things they had to say. I was telling Bill Arnold a while ago, asking if he's going to keep losing weight, and he said, well, he's kind of stabilized where he was. And so I reminded him of what Barney and Andy were talking about one day, and Andy asked Barney, he said, Barney, how much do you weigh? And he said, 127, 127 and a half. I'm just up and down. Some of you watch Andy and Barney, and others say, that doesn't make any difference. In Ephesus, the difficulty that is going on in this city is that it's much like what we sometimes see around us, but it's so commonplace that we don't pay a lot of attention to it, but all the time we're being bombarded by things. But the Temple of Diana was there in Ephesus, and you probably heard these things all of your life, and we don't pay a lot of attention to that. But this Diana has been around for a long time. There are decades of Diana located in different parts of the world, and she is known by Ishtar, Ma, Ashtar, Cybele, Isis, and Artemis. Been around a long time. In the surrounding area of Ephesus that these group of Christians are found, there were thousands of worshipers of Diana. And I won't go into any details with it, but the worship of Diana was probably best described, and if you understand that the Temple of Diana itself was their bank. That was their banking system, but it was also kind of their land office. All financial affairs took place there. If you want to borrow money, you went to the Temple of Diana, you could borrow money there. Sensuality to extents that we could only imagine, and every now we might get an inkling of it on some newscast or whatever. But debauchery was rampant in this city. And so the people that Paul is writing to, he's writing to the individuals many of them who had come out of that environment or had come out of that lifestyle, but they were still living in that same environment. And so a lot of what he has to say then was directed at how they once lived, but the pressures and the pulls were still there. And maybe even some of the Roman Christians had been bothered by that as well, and that they were having difficulties in their own lives. So Paul then writes this letter to these individuals with that thing in mind. He talks about then in verse 18, they were darkened in their understanding. You ever been there where you can't make sense of something, or one time you thought you really had this thing worked out, but on the other side of it, you're now finding yourselves questioning, is this right or wrong? And you hear the things discussed now that you thought a few years ago that would not be discussed. And it's like Isaiah said, the bitter was sweet and sweet was bitter, and right was wrong and wrong was right, and the darkening of the understanding. Maybe exemplified a little bit in this recent thing about, I know you've seen it on the news, about the gorilla and the little boy, and the little boy falls in there and the gorilla grabs him, and then the debate that is still raging on every news station you turn on is about the life of this gorilla versus the life of the child. And I'm thinking, really, we still have to debate? We're to the point we're debating those situations with an animal and a child. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad if you're still wrestling with that. But it's amazing to me the kind of discussion that we're having now. And someone said, well, the parents were at fault. Okay, let's just suppose the parents were at fault. Let's say the dad was so bad that he picked the child up and threw him in the ravine with a gorilla. Does that help the situation any at all? Absolutely not. We've still got a child whose life was in danger, but we're still finding ourselves asking the questions, why did this gorilla have to die? And so here Paul talks about they're darkened in their understanding. It's hard to make sense of anything anymore. What's right or what's wrong? What's bitter or what's sweet? And so these folks are trying to pull out of that, but they're still being bombarded by the same things that had been going on earlier in their lives, and they're having a double dose of it back again. He says in verse 18, they're excluded from the life of God. God didn't exclude them from his life. They've excluded themselves from the life of God, or the way that God would have them to live, because they're listening to other things, that we'll notice in just a moment. He says also in verse 18, because of the hardness of their heart. Well, that sounds like a really callous thing, but even the disciples one time couldn't understand what Jesus said, because he said because of the hardness of their hearts. Because there were so many other things that were crowding in there that their heart had become kind of callous to that, and it didn't affect them any longer. And so Jesus had to explain it to them again, back up and say, okay, here's what we're talking about. And chipping away at the hardness of their heart, because it might have been something they had settled a long time ago in their own minds, and it was a wrong position that they took. And if I hold a wrong position and someone presents to me what is actually right, you think I'm going to accept it because they said that? No, because I've already decided what I believe about that, and so therefore my heart is hardened to anything else. And so here these folks are, their hearts are hardened. And so Paul talks about, and the topic tonight is being transformed from the inside out. You can make yourself act right for a while, but after a while, the real person is going to come out. I've decided that one of the ways you get to know somebody really well is go hunting with them or go fishing with them. I don't golf. I went one time with Dave Phillips and Leon Barnes, and I think I may have told you guys that story, but I love to hear me tell it again. I borrowed Leon. I didn't have any golf clubs. I borrowed Leon Barnes's. Leon borrowed Jolly Pace's golf clubs, and we go golfing. I pulled my putter out of the bag, and it was pink. I've always wondered and questioned Leon Barnes, and that kind of solidified some of the thoughts I had. He had a pink putter in there, but we're playing golf, and we tee off, and boy, I slugged that ball. I hit equally as bad as they did, so I didn't feel too bad about that. We're out on the greens now, and I get out there, and I reach in my bag there, and I pull out a pin or a tee. I stick that thing on the ground, put the ball on. And Dave Phillips said, what in the world are you doing? I said, I'm fixing to hit that ball. He said, you can't do that. I said, why not? He said, that's against the rules. You can't tee off in the green. I said, I guess I can. I got a whole bag full of those things. I bought them. Dylan, did you know that was against the rules? You did. I don't believe that. He's an insurance man. I don't believe it. But he said they become callous in verse 19. Folks, listen closely. This is so easy to do. This is the reason why that this topic, the lead-off topic here, is being transformed from the inside out. They had become callous in their hearts. They weren't listening any longer. Things didn't bother them anymore. They had just let those things slide by so much now that their consciences are callous because of that. And with a shrug of our shoulders, we walk on by. And nothing changes. Verse 19, they're given over to sensuality. These are God's people who are being pulled back. They're given over to sensuality. And then verse 19, they practice every kind of impurity with greatness. It's a strange term. I read that and read it, and I read it so many times over the last 2 or 3 months that they practice every kind of impurity with greediness or greatness. And the word there means greedy, desiring to do more. Couldn't get enough. It had to be more. It had to be bigger. It had to be more sensual. What was common now was commonplace. What was new was now old. And they had to do more and more and more. Never satisfied, never being enough. And then in verse 20, he makes a statement. You did not learn Christ in this way. That's not how you learn Christ. It's not the life that God says a Christian is to live. And so there had to be some changes made in their lives. And so he goes back then now, said, okay, we've addressed the problem. And so now what are we going to do with this? Well, verse 22, he said, in reference to your former manner of life. Here's where coming on the inside now and having to make some transition, having to make the transformation here that is to go on. How are we to do that? He says, first of all, in reference to your former manner of life, he said to lay aside the old self. I thought they'd already done that. When a person is baptized into Christ, the old man is in the grave. You've died to the old man. And in Colossians, he said, we've put on the new man. But now here he is saying that you lay aside the old self that is corrupted in the lust of deceit. See, we've We're supposed to have laid aside the old man. But did you notice that because a person is baptized into Christ and he's put on this new man, this is the way he wants to live, that you notice after a while the old guy is still hanging around. And he's still talking to you in your ear and whispering to you and saying, well, it's not so bad, you know. This is something that's pretty well common with everybody. All of us struggle with those things. And so we allow the old man to hang around. Well, he says then that to lay aside that old self. And it takes a while for the transformation to take place. See, this doesn't happen overnight. I think it's where sometimes that Christians may get a little bit worried, or think, well, maybe this thing didn't take. Maybe there's something wrong with me. But we have to understand that laying aside here is a continuous action. It's got to be something that every day we fight those battles. You fight them every day, don't you? In some way, you fight something every day that comes along. Well, that's part of the battle in there. Satan hadn't given up because, well, this guy's a Christian now, I'm going to leave him alone. He said, no, I'll just take that on as a challenge. The Tunney Dempsey fight, I wasn't there. I think Tommy Williams was. This is probably back in the early 40s. But the Dempsey-Denny fight, Tunney got up in the ring, and boy, they were sparring around, boxing each other, and Tunney just hit old Dempsey and knocked him completely out of the ring, out on the curtains on the outside, on the concrete. He gets up, climbs back in the ring, walks up to Tunney and said, is that all the hard you can hit? Did you hear that? Okay. Paul would say it this way in the battle with Christ, I've been knocked down, but I'm not knocked out. It is a battle that sometimes we might win a battle or two, and sometimes we get knocked completely out. Well, what do we do with that? Well, you get up and you brush yourself off and say, next time it's going to take more than that because God is on my side and He's transforming me into being somebody else than I am right now. And without the struggles, guys, in our lives, the transformation is not going to take place. Because you might think you're doing okay, and Satan wants you to think that and lull you into a little sleep where he can get you in the corner, and I promise you he is more powerful than you and I ever thought about in our lives, and on your own you are going to get whipped. That is a sure fact. But with Christ on our side, then who can be against us? We have got to allow the transformation to take place. When you're in the struggles, do not give up. Do not quit. That is when you're probably on the verge of one of your biggest streaks of winning in your life. You may be on the verge then of becoming stronger than you ever have been in your life. But sometimes we just roll over and throw our hands up and say, well, I guess it's as good as it's going to get. And God said, would you stay in there with me? You see, God has more confidence in you and I than we have in ourselves. Satan's having a conversation with God one time. You heard this, you've read this. And God says, well, where have you been? He said, well, I've been down on the earth, just kind of walking around looking a little bit. And God said, have you considered my servant Job, in whom there is no guile? You think Job knows this conversation going on? No. He's minding his own business. He's going about doing his daily affairs. He does not know that he's going to be one of the oldest books in the Old Testament. He doesn't know that several thousand years later, people are going to be talking about his life. He's trying to live his life and be the man that God wants him to be. And man, he is getting beat up. There's very few people, I've known a few of them, there have been a few of them in this congregation that got beat up as bad as Job got beat up. And he made the comment one day, even though God slay me, yet will I trust him. I'm not going to give up on God because he hasn't given up on me, even though Job didn't have a clue about what was going on. And the very end of it, when Job's friends were there trying to help Job out, trying to help him out, they were making it worse on him. And they made a few things that made comments to Job. They even said in chapter 22, he said, do you think God is concerned? This is in Hebrew. I'm translating it for you now. You think God's concerned about whether you're good or bad? Would it make any difference to God whether you're good or bad? That made sense, didn't it? I mean, they're trying to protect God from what's happening to Job. But if you read the last chapter in the book of Job, God calls Eliphaz on the carpet, and it says, you and your friends have spoken of what is not right concerning me and my servant Job. He said, matter of fact, you better ask Job to pray for you, because what you said about me was wrong. It does matter to God, folks. It does matter how you and I live and how our hearts on the inside are changed, how we're changed people. God wants to say, man, look at this girl over here. That's my daughter. Look at these men. These are my sons and my daughters. And he would love nothing more than to blacken Satan's eyes with your life and my life. Say, would you look at this one? See how this one's transforming? You know the struggles that he or she has been through? But they're right there in the midst of the fight because the transformation is going on. 10 years ago, you couldn't handle what you're handling today. But you couldn't have handled it today had you dropped out of the fight. Because Satan will make us who we ought to be and who we so desperately want to be in our lives. By the way, if I get loud, I'm not mad at anybody. And I don't know why. The longer I talk, the louder I get. My daddy used to tell me that. Son, I don't know what it is about you, but the longer you talk, the louder you get. And I wanted to say to him, Dad, I'm just like you. But I didn't have the nerve to say that. And if he's listening now, I didn't say that. And then he says, okay, lay aside the old self, corrupted in the lust of deceit. Did you see that? Did you hear those words there? The lust of deceit. The deceitfulness of sin. It makes you think you're doing so good. And all the time it's just eating on the inside and weakening us and making us less of the man and the woman that we need to be and should be and could be. And then he says, secondly, in verse 23, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. This is a critical one. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind. And the spirit of the mind is the spirit that directs the mind. It's the little voices back there that says to you and through your mind, you say, you know, I shouldn't be doing that. You know this is not right. So I said, be directed by the spirit of your mind. If the red flags come up, and I know you've heard me say this, if the red flags come up in your mind and you say, well, you know what, there's just something not right about this, leave it alone. Don't toy with it. You shouldn't be there in your mind. You shouldn't be there physically. And allow the spirit of our mind to help the transformation back into this person or into this person that we so need to be. And then thirdly, it says, put on the new self. This is one of those words that's in the aorist tense, and it's present, indicative, and it goes on. It's a continuous action thing. I want to impress Dillard with that. It's a continuous action thing. You put this new man on. When you get up in the mornings, you put this new man on that you want to be. This is the man that I'm going to be today. You say, isn't that hypocritical? There's nothing hypocritical about it at all. A hypocrite is one that acts some way, but he does not intend to be that way at all. A person who wants to transform his life gets up and says, this is the man I want to be, this is the woman I want to be, and I'm putting on this person who looks like Christ because that's who I intend to be like. I want to be like him. There's nothing hypocritical about that at all. Now, if you put it on, you have no intention of changing, that's being a hypocrite. But one who says, this is who I want to be. He said, what if I lose the battle? Well, get up the next morning and put him back on again. Put on the new self. See, now notice this verse. This is verses 24 through 32. I know I'm going past where I'm supposed to be, but don't tell them. Put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. Did you hear that? Put on this new man who has been created, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. And then see what happens with this man on the inside. Don't do it just, go through the motions. But go through it with the idea in mind that this is the heart that I want. I want to be like Jesus Christ. That's not self-righteous. But I want to live like him. I want to be like him. And so you put this man on. And from the inside, make the words come out of your heart and out of your life that really reflects how you feel about the situation. and this person that you want to be. Got a 3-minute video that we're going to watch now. I think Chad's up there and all geared up and ready to go. I want you to watch the difference of an individual who does something because of just out of rote memory, and then an individual who really looks at it from his heart, from the inside, and watch the transformation that takes place. Okay, Chad.
The series is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how do I know, the next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, you know, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
In Matthew 22 and verse 37, Pharisees are loading up for another question, another run at Jesus. Sadducees have already had their chance at him, and he clobbered them. So the Pharisees make a run at Jesus, and they said, "Teacher, which is the greatest of the commandments?" Jesus said, "Just love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it, so love your neighbor as yourself." Pharisees went away, and it said they didn't ask any more questions after that. I tried to approach that verse this past week at Griffville. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. I don't know how many times I've read that. I don't know how many times I've attempted to teach a lesson on that. But it is far deeper, far more involved than I've ever imagined in my life. But that's where I want to be. I want to be that person who loves the Lord with all of my heart, with all of my soul, with all of my mind. I want to be that person who can be transformed, who is being transformed on the inside, that not only do I know what I'm doing, I've been doing what I've been doing for the last 40, I don't know how many years now, 45 or so years. But now I'm being challenged as to why am I doing that? And I've come to the conclusion that it makes all the difference in the world. I think this man was right. It makes all the difference in the world between knowing what you are doing and what a Christian is supposed to do and why a Christian is doing that. I want to know the love of God. I want to know what it is that caused him to love me so. And I want to know what it is in this commandment that Jesus gave us to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, and mind. And what I want to challenge you to do is to go back yourself and relook at this thing. I made a deal with Dale Huff. I said, Dale, let's go back and study this single verse here that Jesus quoted. Let's go back and study this again and look at this and develop a series of lessons on how you love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. And see what we can do with that. And let me challenge you to do the same thing. I want the difference in my life to be what was the difference in this man singing Amazing Grace. He sang the same song both times, didn't he? Same lyrics. First time around was pretty awesome. I wish I could just sing a little bit like the first time around. But then the second time, what was different? He told him to sing it in real life. The things that he knew was happening in his life. That's what I want, folks. I want to be that man who, when I sing Amazing Grace, I know I'll never reach the voice he has, but in my quaking and squawking and I'm in puberty of life all over again, my voice is changing again. But when I live my life out in the view of others, I want to be the person whose life says, it shows inside and out. This is God's person. For my own benefit? No. Folks, our world needs men and women of faith who are living our lives out. And I'm not saying that you're not, but I'm challenging all of us to be transformed from the inside out. I know it's happening, and I know you've been doing it. I know you've been working on it for years. But let's pretend this is the last 2 minutes. Coach, what do they call the 2 minutes in football? 2 minute what? Exercise? 2 minute? 2 minute drill. Well, I know my grandchildren think that I'm past the 2 minute drill. Sawyer, not too many years back, asked why his grandpa Lawson had died, and Kobe said, well, son, he got old. He said, well, why ain't Papa and Garry dead? And one of these days he's going to spend the night with me again, and he'll pay for that. I may find me a gorilla or something other, you know. I don't know where you are in your station of life, but I'd like for us, for the intensity of it, is maybe on this transformation from the inside out, go into a 2 minute drill. and really bear down on this series you're doing in Ephesians. Ephesians is the book to do it. And I hope you'll make your commitment to be here every Wednesday night and not only wait for the guys who are the presenters, but be studying it as well. And I think you'll find it very, very helpful in lives. Let me go back to this Matthew 22 and verse 37, and then I'm through. G.K. Beale, I read a book by him several years ago, and I found this statement again. He says in regards to Matthew 22, verse 37, as we love God more in the process, as we love God, we in the process become more of what God wants us to be and more of what our hearts desire. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18, we are being transformed from one glory to the next. There is a transformation process going on in your life. But I want mine to speed up. I'd like for the transformation to intensify just a little bit more. Because I find myself having days like today when I find out that I haven't transformed quite enough yet. There's still so much of this old man that's tagging along with me that doesn't let me respond in a way that I know I need to respond. And I want to be God's person. And I know that every person here tonight feels the same way. We want to be God's people and be that in every way. And the only way it's going to happen is let Him continue, let me hear that word, continue to transform, because He's doing it every day, and we need to be people willing to let that happen. I love the songs, Prince of Peace, Control My Will, Nearer, Still Nearer, and Humble Yourselves in the sight of the Lord. I find those all challenges, because I like the way I do things, but I find out the way I do things sometimes is not the way the Lord would have me to do them. And so I need that transformation to take place. I love you guys deeply. Think of you often. And I'm glad we're where we are. Some really good things going on. Very, very frustrating. So I know we're doing some good. I want you to pray with me now. Father, thank you for loving us so deeply. Thank you, Father, for challenging us so much, Father. Because you know what we're capable of, Father, and we sometimes give up on ourselves too quickly. We shorten ourselves, Father, too readily. Help us to be the people you need us to be, Father, and we so desperately need to be in our own lives. Thank you for this great body of people here, Father, and for the great work they do in this community. Thank you for every marriage and every family here, Father, and every individual. We pray, Father, that you'll bless us each one very deeply, Father. Transform us into what you want us to be, Father, and we know that image is to be that of Christ. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.